Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome back if you've been here before, if you've watched any of my videos, or any of the crazy shorts I've made. Today I'm going to be talking about something that has been a passion of mine for many years. Although it was more of a passion when I was in my teenage years, really, my mid-teens. Well, actually, it's technically two main things and another area. Kind of, it's similar, really. So I from being very young, from being probably about 5 or 6 years old, I was interested in mechanical things, like just and not just the actual mechanical, not how things worked, but just machinery, and more of the kind of I guess autistic, you could say, perhaps, you know, kind of obsessions, let's say. So I was interested in buses and trains from a very early age, but before that became a thing, I was interested in like smells, really. Like I was really interested in, like, it's very strange, really, but the smell of petroleum, the smell of diesel. I was really interested in. I was a weird kid, admittedly. Things like car springs, suspension. I don't know. I was just always kind of fascinated by the suspension springs on vehicles, and especially on trains. It started with cars, and then it moved on to, I think, buses and trains later on. And I was interested in how, like, car exhausts sounded, and it was a strange kind of beginning to my enthusiasm for trains and buses, and I guess that's kind of where it began, really, for me. Although I'm probably on a deeper level, it was probably more of a genetical thing, given that my father was very much a train man, and his father worked on the railway, I think for quite a big chunk of his life, if I'm not mistaken. Cheers. Nice cup of coffee in the morning, you can't beat it. So I guess really what became a passion, enthusiasm for public aspects of public transport was really kind of set in motion, really. I saw something yesterday on a YouTube video. Someone commented on it. Was like a psychological video, and someone had commented, genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger, kind of thing. And I think that can relate to many areas of one's life, what becomes one's life. But certainly in terms of one's interests, you might diverge somewhat from the interests of your parents. You might have some similarities or things that cross over in certain ways, but you probably, for the most part, at least, one or two children are going to have some kind of similarities with the parents in terms of their interests. or at least for a period of time anyway, if not their entire lives. And for me, growing up in the area that I grew up in, it was kind of a natural, I guess maybe it was kind of like a natural progression, given that my father had introduced me to his love of railways and steam engines and diesels and things, big, the big old diesel trains and of the 60s, 70s. So I guess it was kind of, I was influenced heavily by that. But also growing up in a city as well, I was surrounded by, where I lived as a child, as a teenager, I was surrounded by public transport, so I was surrounded by buses all the time, and I had a direct view to the main road where I lived when we moved into our house when I was 6. I'll come on to that in a moment, because that's quite a big chunk of the story as well. So that played into it, and also the fact that we weren't actually that far away from the docks, because obviously Hull's, Kingston upon Hull as it was, or Hull as it's now known, pretty much called for the most part, or Hull, is a port city and has been, I think it's since the 12th or 13th century, and I think it was used for like wool, and it got, obviously became a very active fishing port. But I think predominantly these days it's pretty much a port for pretty much everything now. I think timber, cars, tractors, things like that. They're quite big sources of income these days. Importing, exporting things, however it works. So the fact that I was close to the docks and I could hear the P&O ferries from being young, blasting the horns twice a day, whatever it was. You could hear that from where I lived. So I guess, and as well, it was, you could kind of smell that there was we weren't that far away from an industrial estates. So there was certain smells in the air at certain times of the day, and you could sort of hear if the wind was blowing in the right direction. You could smell certain things. And you can also hear a lot of industrial sounds and factory noises and things, because we weren't that far away from Heading Road, which was basically another kind of industrial area, especially whereabouts I was located. So I would imagine that all of those things kind of played into it. And then, as my younger brother was born in 1995. So by the time I was 10, I think predominant by then I'd kind of started to get interested in buses and trains. Although I didn't really realise it at that point. I don't really think I truly understood my passion, my enthusiasm, until I was probably my mid to later teens. But it wasn't an enthusiasm like for example the kind of who's kind of become a bit of a star, really, and in his own right, and fair dues to him with respect to the guy, Bourgeois. He was quite a young guy, he's kind of more on the kind of extreme side of it. I was never quite like that, but I was definitely a train buff for a number of years in my mid-teens, and then I became more interested in buses once I got sort of around about 17. That's not true. I was interested in buses and trains pretty much from about, I'd say, kind of, I guess it properly started when I was probably about 14, 15. And it became more of a thing. Certainly in 2005, 2006, 2007, those were the years that I was more active, as in going out looking at trains and spending time with one of my best friends at the time, David, another guy named David. He was a bit of a, I don't think he quite, for him it was more of a, I think for him it wasn't quite the same thing as me. It was more of a pastime for him. I think it was more of a, I think it became more of a photography thing because it was something. There was a period of time when we had to do a project at school where we had to design a PowerPoint presentation on something that we loved, or one of our passions, or whatever. And I did mine about trains. I've still got it somewhere on a USB file from all those years ago, which is kind of hard to believe, but I started trying to find it and upload it at some point. It's pretty basic, but it's interesting if it's possible to somehow upload it onto YouTube. I don't know, but maybe it's just best left where it is in the past. Anyway, so yeah, I became an enthusiast. I think to be honest, I became a train enthusiast first, and it kind of makes sense. And then I think as I got a bit older, kind of just. I think honestly I was influenced by my younger brother really on the bus side of things later on in my mid-teens, but that interest in buses was there from when I was about 7 or 8, because I'd been on a lot of bus trips with my late grandfather. So the company that was East Yorkshire used to run a lot more interesting buses on their main routes back in the day. There used to be a thing called the Mistra trip, where I think it was every Sunday, maybe Saturdays. I think it was a Sunday. They used to have, I grew up in a time where there was still a lot of step entrance buses in service. The low floor phenomenon, or if you want to call it that, wasn't quite a thing yet. That didn't really fully take off until that didn't really properly take off until I'd say really the early to mid 2000s. But I don't honestly think it really became a thing until it didn't really become a thing until I'd say sort of 04 or 05 time. That's when I think the low floor era became more accepted. I think honestly it wasn't really seen as a. It was slowly becoming becoming more popular. It was becoming more of a common thing, starting really from the late 90s, but it didn't really become like a full on across the board kind of like a prevalent force in the bus network really until I think the mid 2000s really. So yeah, I grew up in an interesting time because it was a great time of change. It was a time in terms of buses and trains where certainly in the bus network, and as an enthusiast, it was a very, very interesting, diverse mix of vehicles, where there still had a lot of the old 70s, 80s vehicles still in use when I was a kid, even when I was a teenager, and obviously at the same time a lot of new buses were put into service, a lot of them step entrance. So I was at the very end of, kind of at the back end of an era that was not, that was slowly but surely becoming irrelevant. Basically, it was becoming a thing of the past. It was, by the time we got to say 2007, 2008, there was a lot more of a push, I think, towards trying to get low floor vehicles to make up the entirety of most big bus companies' fleets. And certainly by the time we got to 2010, 2011, 12 time, it was pretty much game over for the step entrance buses, even those of the 90s. So it was a very interesting experience growing up in that time, just in general. But as an enthusiast, I don't really quite like using that word, because I sometimes don't know if I really was, if I could truly class myself as an enthusiast, because I wasn't someone that went around writing numbers down. I wasn't someone that, I wasn't like obsessive about it kind of thing. It wasn't a thing of I've got to do this, or it wasn't a it was more of a kind of temporary thing, really, I think, more than anything else. It was, I think initially it was just a kind of pastime to some extent. But maybe I just didn't want to kind of admit to myself that I was somewhat autistically minded, maybe, and maybe I didn't quite realise it. But anyway, I think it became more of a kind of passion. But I think for me it was more of a kind of, it wasn't so much of the, it wasn't so much of, it wasn't like going out there and meeting people, or like trying to find like-minded individuals. It wasn't like a cry for help kind of thing. I think it was more of a kind of therapeutic thing, perhaps, more than anything else. Although obviously I did certainly have an interest in buses and trains, but I think under the surface it was more of a, it was an escapism, really. It was a way of me de-stressing. It was, there was no responsibility when you was doing that. There was a sense of independence. There was this sense of you're free from other people's obligations. There's no one really bothering you, and that, I think that's one of the things that I loved about it. But of course, I loved the smells. I loved how certain vehicles looked. I loved how certain vehicles' engines sounded. That was definitely a part of it. There's no denying that. But on a psychological level, it was a comforting thing. It was a mental health kind of a look at this, I guess. It was more than just about the buses, the trains. It was a way of me dealing with it was a way of dealing with what wasn't exactly an easy life in some ways. It wasn't always ideal, and it was kind of like my kind of fuck you to the world kind of thing, maybe, in a way. It was you can say whatever you want about me, you can bully me, you can treat me like this, whatever, but in these moments I'm empowered kind of thing. It was a sense of this is my freedom, this is my solace, this is my kind of like you can't touch me when I'm doing this kind of thing. It was that kind of maybe that kind of an attitude, but yeah, it was a very it was a strange kind of a hobby, really. I think I'd say, yes, I was an enthusiast, but I'd say I was a part-time one. I think is the truth of the matter. Until really, I think it wasn't something. It wasn't like something that I did every day. Like I would. What initially got me into buses really was the mystery trips, was the journeys with my grandfather to places like Hornsey, Withensea, the smells of the hot rubber after a long run somewhere, obviously during the summer when it's hotter. The engine, feeling the heat of the engine, the smell of the engine, the sounds of the bus, creaking and things, different sounds, and just this thrill of like going somewhere, especially when you're younger, this thrill of the journey, it wasn't about getting there, it was about the experience of just being on that bus or that train and just living in the moment kind of thing. I think that's what I really loved about it as a child. That I was getting away from the monotony of life. I was getting away from this constant cycle of, the same thing happening over and over again, whether that was at home, or whether that was at school, or whether that was with friends, whatever it was. For me, it was like going abroad, because obviously as a kid I didn't go abroad. So for me, the closest thing to being abroad was going to a local, coastal city or whatever. And that's one of the things I loved. And East Yorkshire also had a bit there, that there was a bit more of a classy kind of service. The drivers seemed to care more, they seemed to have a bit more of a friendly attitude. They seemed to, I don't know what it is now, but back then it seemed like, just seemed to care more. The uniforms were better, the livery was better than Stagecoach, which was the main company, and still is for the most part in the city. So it was, for me, it was kind of like breaking the class barrier to some extent, maybe as well. Maybe there was an element of that to it. Feeling like I'd gone up in the world. It was kind of a bit ridiculous outlook on it all, but maybe there was that as well. It was kind of like stepping up. It was experiencing something that it was weird. It was weird because, I don't know, maybe I just didn't have a lot of self-esteem as a kid, and we tend to be very insecure when we're young. But so anyway, yeah. So East Yorkshire, that was a massive influence on me, but obviously the Stagecoach as well, especially when I got into my early teens. I'd say really it was 2000, 2001 onwards. That's when I kind of started to get interested, I think, into Stagecoach a little bit more. And certainly by the time my brother was like, 7 or 8, I think that's when I think he started to know that he started kind of becoming more conscious of his bus enthusiasm, because for him that was predominantly his love, his life, his energy was to me. I don't really see myself as an enthusiast when I compare myself to my younger brother, because for him it was an all-encompassing thing. It really was about, because I remember he used to take notes all the time. He used to have like a big notebooks of the vehicle numbers and the registrations and things like that. And I only really got into the registration plate things. Actually, my brother taught me about that, oddly enough, about how the registration system worked. That would have been probably in 2004, 2003 or 4 maybe. I can't really remember. It could be 2005 actually. Because I was never really that interested. For me, it wasn't about the numbers. It wasn't about wasn't really about that. It wasn't. It was for me. It was. We both were interested in it for different reasons, and I think as well as because we shared a room growing up, it kind of solidified it really that we had this shared common interest, whereas like with my older brother, we didn't really have that much in common really. We both liked music, but we both liked very different music. You know, me and my older brother, were very different people, really, in many respects. But we had a really good relationship as kids, but we were very, very different people. You know, my older brother was very much a football guy, and that was his passion as a kid and a teenager and as a young adult, and it still is pretty much to this day. But I think for different reasons. Because I remember we used to get football magazines, and he was always watching the matches on the TV with my dad. So I think my brother Kevin was very much like my father. That side of that part of my father, who was very much into like cricket, snooker, football, pool, things like that. He took that aspects, those interests from my father, whereas me and my brother, I think we were more, I think, aligned to the other side. That is, you know, this public transport interest for whatever reasons that came into being. So, you know, it all kind of, a lot of things came together, a lot of environmental influences came into it. It wasn't just a genetic thing, but that clearly was something that I'm pretty sure that there was definitely it. But I think as well that maybe it was to some extent, it was kind of, it maybe in a way kind of almost like forced upon us in a way, because we were always, you know, listening to my father talk about like buses. I used to get bus magazines and stuff, so I think there were certain things that triggered it, and it kind of like became like a cycle eventually, because obviously things were set in motion, and my brother kind of became more and more interested in the bus side of things, and it kind of just like I became very much influenced by him, and because I think I respected his more kind of like thorough understanding and interest in buses. Although really, I think for him it was a thing of his autism. I think if he does have it, I think he does. I think as a kid it was very much about numbers, whereas with me it was a very oral kind of thing. I was fascinated by sounds. Like I was really, for some reason, I was just really interested in like certain sounds, and I always remember like making those sounds as a kid. Like the sound of the tractor coming to the school, I just loved that sound. Still love it to this day. Sounds of the machines coming to cut the grass. Only certain things that was very, very specific sounds that I found myself drawn to. I don't know if there's like some harmonic aspect to it, something that the harmonics, this sort of dissonant, these sort of like wobbling kind of like sound waves or whatever. That's probably why I kind of got interested in ambient music and electronic music later on. So for me, it began as a kind of, it was a kind of passive thing really for a while, and then it became more of an active hobby, if you like, or pastime, whatever you want to call it, when I got into my mid-teens, and that's really when I started spending more time in Hull Paragon station, where I could spend hours and hours and hours on my, a lot of the time on my own. I didn't, and for the most part, I never really got bothered by anybody. it was only until sort of the last few years when I started having issues with the security there. And I suspect some of it was probably the fact that I was a teenager up to no good kind of thing or whatever, I don't know. But certainly, I think I remember like going out to watch the trains on near just off Annaby Road. There's a level crossing near East Yorkshire's depot. Can't remember what the name of the road is now, but there was a footbridge. I think that's gone now because there was a stabbing there not long ago. It was a bit crazy. I was a bit of a crazy teenager, really, and that's putting it lightly. But for me, the thing that grounded me was trains. I think it was transport. It was sounds, music, being alone a lot of the time. I loved being alone. I loved the isolation. Even I remember being at school when I was like 15, and during my lunch I'd just go behind this like mound, this like man-made like hill to the left of the main playing field at the back of Isaac, and I just sit there by myself like reading a book, and it didn't bother me in the slightest. It didn't really. And I think just I was starting to change, I think, toward my later teens. Like when I got to like 15, 16, I was starting to change, and I think I was kind of becoming a lot more introverted than I was in before that. And I think that's kind of where the vision had come in between me and my friend, and that's where I think it was kind of the beginning of the end of our friendship, really. We did have somewhat of a shared interest in trains, but it wasn't really, to me, it wasn't really a train enthusiast. It was just somebody that kind of did it out of boredom, really, and I think he did it out of, although to some extent I did as well. But I think really, honestly, there were times when I used to sit in Hull Paragon station, and I could kind of just zone out, really. And he never really got any weird looks or anything from anybody. It really was my go-to source of tranquility, and I didn't realise it at the time. But as well, it was trains that I did love trains. I loved them starting up and watching the exhaust fumes come out of like the class 156s, class 158s, the Pacers, the class 185s. The class 222s, and from time to time you see the odd diesel, and obviously for a period of time the what were they called, the HSTs, 43 class 43s, watching them when they still had their original engines for a period of time, like 2005, 2006, 2007, I think. That was something that really was like wild for me as a kid, like that power, that it was a thing of empowerment. I think it was this thing of, it gave you something. It's hard to describe it. It gave you this kind of this strength almost, like doing that and coming back from it. You felt kind of refreshed. You felt renewed from it. It gave you something. It gave you. It was a coping mechanism, but it was also, there was something about it that gave you a sense of belonging, I guess. It gave you a sense of energy. This the sounds of some of these engines and powering up and revving their engines and things like that. I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. Especially 156s, because it used to make a right racket, and also later on the buses as well. Like well, actually, I should probably kind of started really earlier, because in 2003 we used to go into town quite a lot during the weekends, and also when I used to spend time with my grandfather in the late 90s, early 90s, when the old bus station was there, used to hear him revving up and clouds of smoke bellowing out of the exhaust and things. So there's a lot of influences there. There were a lot of things that triggered what became my love of trains, I guess. I think really buses, I think ultimately my love of buses kind of spilled over into my love of trains, but then it kind of came back again to buses and to trains again in my 20s to some extent. I still love, I still have somewhat of an enthusiasm for buses and trains, but it's mostly like looking at videos from vehicles from my kind of era, really, so the 90s, 90s, or even to some extent the 80s, 70s, because we used to see some of those vehicles in service when I was a kid, so it was a very, I was a weird kid. I can't deny that. I was a weird kid, and I was misunderstood because, it's like me looking at my brother and thinking, oh, how can you be so interested in football? I don't quite get it. It's like I get it to some extent, but not quite. And I guess he feels the same way about me and my brother. His brothers. But I think ultimately it's the same thing deep down. It reveals itself in different things. I think that the similar feelings are there between people, but it just happens to for some people they go down this route, for other people go down that route, but it's probably somewhat along the same lines, or you're inspired by certain things, you're influenced, you kind of there's things that there's certain memories that get stuck with you, and there's certain things that I don't know, for whatever reason, certain things just in the moment they become prominent things and they become prominent memories, and so everything kind of feeds into itself, kind of thing, and it just turns into this kind of smoothie, and before you know it, it's just like so many different things are combined together that you can't completely single out one single thing that's what started it, or that's what pushed me from this point to this point. It was a combination of things, really, I think, overall. So I used to spend a lot of time in the interchange on my own, and then later on with David, and then actually with Ashley and another kid from school called another David as well. Can't remember what his surname was now. Grimmer, David Grimmer. David Rimmer, that was his name. Sorry, Grimmer. So yeah, me, David Holtum, and then later David Rimmer. We ended up having a bit of a kind of short-lived phase for ferries, but that was because David Rimmer's thing was boats. I don't know if it was just boats in general or like cruise ships or whatever. So we actually went through a phase where we used to go down the docks and watch them leave, and that was fascinating. I really loved that as well. That was and I kind of actually have a bit of a liking for cruise ships. It's not really my thing, as in travelling on them. I don't think I would like to do that, but I do kind of like them, and I certainly I've really always loved going down there and watching them leave. That was a fascinating thing for me. And honestly, I think at some point I would like to get back to, to some extent, kind of reliving my youth, maybe in certain ways. Because there's nothing wrong in it. You're not breaking the law. It's not it's not illegal. And I think really that's what brought me to life. That was my thing. But it wasn't. It wasn't jotting notes down. It wasn't taking photos. It was just that experience there and then, being in that moment. As long as you've got a little bit of money in your pocket, as long as you've got something to eat, or you're with the right company, you could do it for hours and hours and hours, and you know, and you wouldn't give a fuck about anything else. And that's what I loved about it. That's the thing that I think for me, that's what real freedom was. And I think ultimately I've kind of been searching for something to replace that over the years, and don't think I've ever quite found it, apart from exercise, I guess, like going out and exercising, walking, jogging, riding a bike. I used to love riding a bike as a kid and a teenager, still do. So some things do change in certain ways, and I think, you know, you do have to grow up at some point. But that doesn't mean you have to completely lose your passions, your interests. It's just that you have to kind of approach things a little bit differently, I think, as you get older. You know, you can't go around acting like your 15-year-old, your old self anymore. that would be ridiculous. But that doesn't mean that you can be who you are. But it just kind of adapt things slightly and take a different approach to things. You know, it's you know, we've all got to have something to cling on to in this world. You need something, because life's hard and it can be debilitating and it can wear you down. And I think having a passion, whether it's whatever it is, whether it's football, you know, whether it's going to the gym, you know, whether it's climbing mountains or doing extreme sports, whatever, or just, you know, looking at buses, trains, collecting stamps, whatever the case may be. If that's what gives you, if that's what you feel life is about for you, stick to that. You know, keep that in you. Don't let it die out, because that might be the thing that you can cling on to when everything else is falling apart around you. You know, and it's not just about that. This like coping mechanism, like hobby or whatever. It is about the actual hobby. It is about the thing as well. You know, and I feel sorry for the people that don't have that, or don't quite have the same spark of something than some people do. I feel sorry for people like that, really. But then again, I would quite like to know what it's like to be like that. You know, so I guess it becomes an obsession. It becomes, in some ways, it takes over your life, and it can override things. There can be consequences because of it, because it can lead you down paths that might not in the long run be the best for you. But you know, I think, you know, like anything in life, you have to decide. You know, you have to make sacrifices, and you have to choose. You have to decide what you feel is best for you, what you think's right for you, what you feel is life, really. I think in and of itself, you know, if you haven't got much, if you are like someone that struggles or deals with things like, and that's not to say that, you know, this is not to generalise and say that everyone that's a boat, plane, you know, train, bus, car, motorcycle, whatever the case may be, enthusiast is autistic or is on some kind of spectrum or something, because that would be ridiculous. That's probably not the case for a lot of people, but it might, you know, you could say that there certainly seems to be some correlation between those that have some degree of autism and certain, like, really very, very obsessive about certain things, whether it's certain sounds, doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. This habit forming, this cyclic nature of things, certain very, very dominant interests that seems to override everything else, overshadow everything else. So there's certainly some truth to it, but it's obviously not the case that everyone's like that. So yeah, you know, it was. There was a lot of times that I felt it can be a lonely existence. It can be a lonely hobby. It's very misunderstood. It's very stigmatized as well, unfortunately. especially in the West, certainly in England, I think, although it's probably more accepted there than it is in maybe other parts of the world, I think. It's so, I don't know, it's not, it's accepted, but kind of it's ridiculed, I think. It's probably the best explanation of it. I think that the way I look at it anyway, it's not, you don't so much get you don't get discriminated against for the most part, but you certainly get some odd looks from time to time, and you can get, you know, the odd remark, and, you know, people having a laugh, you know, kind of taking the piss kind of thing and whatever. But, you know, at the end of that's kind of what you're always going to face in life anyway, regardless of who you are, what your interests are. There's always going to be people that don't understand you and make no attempts to try and understand you, no attempts to try and, you know, to experience it even. And you know, the truth is that it's not for everybody. Just like I said, like, football's not my thing, but I understand why people like it. It's like, I don't mind watching a game on the TV or the internet from time to time. But it's not really my thing per se. It's like, I can enjoy it, I can appreciate it, but it's not something that I'm going to go actively out my way to get engaged in. And so you have to expect that from other people as well. You know, it's that. But there's a difference between, you know, being kind of, you know, having some sort of reservations and some sort of preconceived notions about it, and being, you know, sort of rude and disrespectful, and just being kind of a bit of a cunt, really, about other people's interests that you don't understand, you don't get. You know, because some people will just never get it. They'll just never get what it means to somebody. It's not even about what it is in and of itself. It's about that thing that you get from it, or those things that you get from it. That's what it is. You could say it's a kind of it's a dopamine chasing kind of, it's an endorphin kind of, you know, it gives you this bubble kind of, this comforting feeling. It's and I think it's this thing of, because it's always there, you know, it's something to, it just gives you something to hold on to. And, you know, when there was times, I think what changed it for me over the years, ultimately, look, I could sit here and talk for hours about this thing, like I do with my younger brother Christopher, because there's just so much to say, and like with any of these videos I make, there's a lot. Sometimes when I'm finished, I'm like, oh, why not say this? Why not talk about that? Could have mentioned this. You know, you could spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on just one topic and one video, but I don't want to do that. So I'm just trying to give a general kind of, you know, picture of these things in whatever I'm talking about in my video, trying to break it down into a video that's not that long, but, you know, give some kind of, you know, thorough, you know, effort to it, at least, you know, as much as I can think about it in the moment. Because, like I said, everything I do or every video I make on my YouTube channel, I usually have some kind of an idea of where I'm going with things. I might have, you know, I want to touch upon this, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there and in what order necessarily. You know, I might go back and forth between things, but I think really coming on to kind of what changed it for me was well, there was a few things really. There was a few things that changed it. One, the main thing I think was age. Two was circumstances, because obviously, you know, as you get older, you start to change, whether you like it or not. And
I just started to change, and you know, I think there's only so long you can keep doing things before you just kind of naturally go through a period, a stage, a phase of life where you start going off in a different direction. But you might come back to it at some point for different reasons. So there was a long period of time where I used to do things by myself, and then eventually that kind of, I don't know if I got bored of it, but I kind of just started gravitating towards the kind of bus side of things, because my brother was, he was getting into his mid-teens, and so by the time that I was a very young adult, you know, he was in his mid-teens, and so there was, you know, there wasn't that much of an age gap, and it wasn't that too many changes between us, and so things were kind of right at the right time, I guess. We was in the right places at the right time, doing the things at the right time, and the bus scene when we started both going out together, spending more time together, doing this hobby. Things kind of aligned back then. It wouldn't have worked. It just wouldn't have worked now, I don't think. I don't. If it was now, I don't think we would probably have even become bus enthusiasts. Actually, my brother really shaped me in many ways, and I think really kind of got me into it fully. Whereas I think for a while there was a period of time where I was very interested in the pictures and just the visuals and the audio rather than just the experience kind of thing, like going on websites and looking at fleet lists and things like that. But it became, you know, an experience, a lived experience thing eventually, that I used to go out with my brother and used to go on buses all the time, various routes, and we used to have a lot of fun actually at times. You know, sometimes it was a bit boring, it was kind of mediocre. There was all right days, great routes, fast journeys. We used to have some really great drivers with Stagecoach. Just over 10 years ago now. So there was a lot of great times that we had, and also with his friend when he used to for a few years, I'd say maybe 2007 or 8-ish up till about 2011, maybe 2012-ish. Those were the years where we spent a lot of time together visiting depots, and it was a thrill-seeking kind of thing. I think eventually it became a thrill-seeking hobby, because Chris, my brother and I, we got to kind of know he got to know, I think, firstly, some really fast drivers, and so it became more of a thrill-seeking kind of a, you know, autistic kind of like thrill-seeking hobby, but also just the fact that we used to, and as well when his friend used to come along, I think that kind of broke up some of the kind of, you know, monotony between my brother, because obviously we lived together all the time, so it was good for him to have his own friend there, but I think we all got something from it, from a mental health standpoint, but we also got something from it from a kind of, you know, there was enjoyment out of it because of some of the fast journeys, just the buses that were on, certain buses that we really liked, that we actively sought to get on. So it actually became more of I guess towards the later part, when we used to go out sort of 2009, 10-ish, 11, 10, 9, 09, 10-ish time. I think that was kind of like the peak of our lived experience, enthusiasm side of things. and I think, but ultimately, we used to have a lot of fun. You know, we used to just like go on off buses for a little while. We used to go and eat and grab something to eat, and then go and do some more journeys and kind of head home at, you know, what 9, 10 o'clock at night or whatever it was, maybe 11 sometimes, but not usually too late. It was a thing of getting out the house. It was a thing of dealing with issues at home, issues at school, dealing with our, you know, the fact that we didn't really know ourselves yet, quite yet. We were still both growing, and I think it was a bonding experience as well. It was a brotherly, it was a way of us bonding together, a shared common interest, and it was something to do in a city that often felt very dull and boring, and an escapism from the troubles of growing up on a council estate as well. I think that was definitely a part of it. It was a kind of, it was our form of therapy, I guess you could say. It was our way of dealing with our own insecurities, our own personal problems, and those that we had to deal with within our immediate environment, and those just outside of it. But eventually, you know, it came to a point where I think I basically stepped back from it. I stepped away from it because I'd met a woman when I was 20, and it was kind of the end of it in a way for a short period of time. You know, and then we kind of got back into it again. I think it was in 2012. I could be wrong now. It might have been 2011, 2012 or something. I can't really remember now. Very short period of time. And then it just kind of, it fell by the wayside, and you know, I was obviously becoming a young man at that point. You know, I was in my early 20s. I was going out to nightclubs, and you know, it became less of a thing for me. It became less of an interest, and also the bus scene itself was changing. A lot of the buses that we really loved, a lot of them were starting to go by that point. The buses that we grew up with, that we knew when we were kids or teenagers. So, you know, things were changing in many directions, and obviously, you know, I'd left school by that point. I'd left college, and you know, obviously I was lucky. I was a young man with all of those things that come with that. And you know, he was becoming not that far away from becoming a young man himself. So, you know, we were both at a crossroads kind of thing in our lives for different reasons. There were a lot of problems going on at home, a lot of things that were going on, and and obviously with my brother's friend kind of having his own problems at home, and him starting a family, it all kind of collapsed in on itself eventually, and that was pretty much the end of it, really. I think there was a period of time where we kind of both weren't really interested in, not really that interested in talking about it anymore, and kind of, it was kind of all over with and done with. It was, you know, I don't know. We'd had our times, we had our memories. You know, we'd done what we'd done, and that was it. So, just give me a moment. So yeah, it was you know, it wasn't a short-lived interest or hobby or anything, but it you know, things come and go. Things you change, and you get older, and your priorities change, and your interests change to some extent, and you know, you started, I think, getting more and more into music and stuff. So things had changed, and it was just things had to change, and they did. And I went my own way, and he went his own way. But we've got our memories, and we talk about it passionately as we do. And I wouldn't tear my head away from completely, getting back into it to some extent. But it'll never be the same again. And but we still have it. It's still there, and it'll never die. It'll never go away. So I'm thankful that I am who I am, and my brother is who he is, and glad that we have our memories and we can still experience things to some extent, even now, and will be able to in the future. It'll never be quite the same, but still, it never really dies. It never goes away. It just changes. You have to kind of adapt and take a different approach to things as you get older and have a different outlook on things. Buses aren't the same as they used to be. The experience is a little bit different than what it was before, but that's life. Things change, and I might do another part to this video because there's other things I'd like to talk about it. But I think for now I'll leave it there, and I hope you've enjoyed getting to know me a little bit more. And if anybody else is an enthusiast, train, bus enthusiast, or whatever it might be, aviation enthusiast, and maybe you can relate to this in some way. So anyway, that's this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much. Bye bye.